Hey, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sayela. I hope you're having a great day. Today we're going to take a look at day 2 of the development updates for Pantheon. Today we'll be looking at the unified NPC templates. Before we jump into things, if you find my content helpful, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel for future updates. You can also find me live on Twitch from Monday to Friday around 7:30 p.m. Eastern. All right, let's get into it. So again, today we're going to be covering the combat and progression update details, part 2 for unified NPC templates. To set the stage for the upcoming combat and character progression updates, we will begin with the most fundamental change, removing the solo versus group distinction for NPCs. Let's start with a little history. The history of chevrons. In our desire to create content that could pose a significant challenge to groups, we have experimented with several approaches over the course of development. Our earliest attempts pushed the difficulty of individual NPCs to the point where every NPC, from the least to the greatest, needed to at least a mid-sized group to engage. At this point in time, essentially everything in the game was a chevron NPC. Did you get aggro from that wolf or bear or rat while running through AVP by yourself? / corpse. It was a great time for groups during this early era, but we had pushed Pantheon beyond group-centric into being a group-only game, and something that needs to be said aloud and clear as this, or needs to be said loud and clear as this. Pantheon was never envisioned as a group-only game. Part of the magic in the early MMO that so heavily inspired us was the relative freedom to set out either as a full group of adventurers or to carve a path alone. I think that's a good thing. I think games need to have that balance of group content and solo content. I said it in my video yesterday. I think this is particularly important because if you're a DPS class, a lot of times you'll spend longer looking for a group than if you're, say, a tank or a healer or maybe an enchanter that's heavily desirable for groups to make it work. So these classes, and even healers and tanks to an extent, I mean, it just depends the time of day. I've seen days where there was 5 druids looking for groups. So these classes all need to have some capability to be able to still experience the game and have something to do when they're in that looking for group queue. So I think that's a good thing to strive for. We needed a way to get back to a place where both solo and full group play was viable without being trivial for full groups. It needed to be a solution that would hold up during heavy iteration and work with the extremely limited content that was available at that time. To accomplish this, we first developed a system of NPC templates to govern an NPC's health, armor mitigation, resistance values, and many other combat characteristics by grouping them into templates based on their class and entity type that scaled with their level. But on top of these categorical scaling templates, we created a difficulty tier value to function as a smart multiplier on the stats within the template, significantly increasing the health, armor, damage output, etc. of an NPC that had an increased difficulty tier. We slapped a chevron symbol on the nameplate at NPCs with this difficulty tier, enabled as a visual indicator to players that those NPCs were built differently, requiring a group to handle, and thus chevrons were born. Over time, we have expanded on this concept of difficulty tiers to create additional categories of NPCs, swarmers, pets, major bosses, raid bosses, and more. Chevrons served us very well for a while. Chevrons allowed us to quickly get the game to a point where full groups could be adequately challenged without crushing solo players and small groups game-wide in the process. The data we collected over these past years since the introduction of chevrons allowed us to find points of turning for both groups and solo content at the same time, all of which have set the stage for the upcoming changes. All right, so the big question that many people have, why are we removing chevrons? Since we began talking about the impending removal of chevrons earlier this year, the community has been consistently asking 2 very natural questions: why and how. First, the why. It would be difficult to quantify how much feedback exists urging us to remove chevrons. There was even a change.org petition created, and the Discord thread where the petition was introduced and discussed ranks as one of our latest Discord topics in history, largest Discord topics in history. The question we had to ask is this: if Pantheon is a group-centric game, and we know our community is counting on us to build a social group-centric game capable of achieving that challenge and tension we have always intended, why are they so dissatisfied with the way it currently works? Chevron NPCs provide ample challenge for full groups, while solo NPCs offer an alternative. What's the issue here? To begin answering this question, I want to share some quotes from our community before we announce this upcoming change. Right now, they have two games, a 6-man group raid-based dungeon game and a solo game that are completely separated. It just sets up the line in the sand and kind of kills the fun of seeing what you can do. While I do enjoy the game, or even the difficulty at times, that part, chevrons, makes it a lot less interesting. It is a very rigid game so far, little true freedom, something that those old games generally were all about. The way we're heading right now is pre-made groups will have lots of playgrounds, and finding people naturally in those areas to group will not exist. I agree with these comments to an extent, especially where they say there's like a separate game where you have group content and solo content. I mean, that's true, because anything that's non-Chevron is basically considered solo, and for the most part, Chevron stuff is considered group. With that said, there are some classes that could pretty effectively solo chevrons, but that's neither here nor there. I wouldn't say it sets up a line in the sand and kills the fun. I mean, it just depends on what type of group play or what type of gameplay you're really looking for. If you're looking to solo, I could see that it adds limitations. If you're looking to group, I mean, you typically know where you're going to group at a specific level. I mean, that's just, most of that stems from there being not as much content right now. I mean, there's content, but at certain levels, you know exactly what camps you have available to you for the most part. So, I mean, yeah, I can see both sides of all of these quotes. So I can't say they aren't accurate. They definitely are to an extent on both sides. There are many more comments that capture this essential message. In creating an effective system to separate and tune solo, duo, trio, and group play, we created a hard line where two could rarely coexist. The result is that most of our dungeons and group content areas are only visited by players in full groups. The people that thrive are those in strong guilds or who have a consistent static group. It is rare you will find a duo or trio, much less a solo player, engaging with a dungeon or chevron-filled point of interest. Yeah, that's not untrue, unless you're a certain class. But even still, like, most chevron areas are more densely populated, so unless you have an ample toolkit to be able to handle that, I use Enchanter as an example. They have the ability to CC and tank and do good damage right now. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the class examples I have where they can kind of excel in those areas. Not every class can do that, unfortunately. And while it may not be immediately apparent, a line from the petition aptly captures why the presence of solo players in small groups matters in those areas. If there were people soloing or duos, trios in place like Helner's Cave, it keeps the zone healthy, and players can reach out locally to recruit missing players or missing classes or backfill a group in order to engage in harder content like major bosses, more densely packed areas, etc. We need to move forward to a place where this healthy local player interaction can happen within the majority of the game's content. One of the most important aspects of classic MMOs is the immersive freedom, the lack of harshly defined rails, and the way the world opens up more and more as your knowledge of the game and skill with your character increases. The significant and artificial difficulty that Chevron NPCs impose has stunted that vision of character progression in a progressively open world. Therefore, we have a plan to remove chevrons in order to realize this tenant level goal of ours once more. I think this will I think the system is going to open up more solo areas in small group. And I only say that because I use EP, Eastern Plains, as an example. I solo there for most of my lower 20s, but it's very clear where you should solo. Like the open field is very ideal for soloing, particularly on a wizard, because you're kiting a lot. You're not a tank or a class that can just sit there and take the damage with your pet or whatnot. But there's also areas in there that are very obvious group areas with, of course, the Chevron icon on the mobs, but they also hit a lot harder compared to the non-Chevron mobs, and they have more hit points. So I think this change will also open up more areas to solo than we currently have. I mean, obviously, you're not going to go into Helner's Cave probably and still try to solo, because most likely you'll still want at least a duo or a trio just because of the mob density or whatnot. But I feel like in more open areas like Eastern Plains or SP, there'll be more solo opportunities compared to what we have now. So I think that's a good thing. Let's go down. What's removing chevrons means for solo players and small groups. Once we remove chevrons, the added difficulty tier value, all NPCs except for named/rares, major bosses, and multi-group targets will inherently use the same stats based on their class and level. This means that whether you encounter a shambling skeleton in Thronefest, a Gadai bandit in Avenir's Pass, an Altherian disciple in Helner's Cave, or an Ash Breather Smoke Knight in the Enclave, if the NPC is at or below your level, you have the means to face it alone. There's a chance you'll be successful. Name/rare NPCs will be slightly more challenging than normal NPCs, but still fall within a category of being soloable, small group friendly under the right conditions. I like the right conditions because depending, I mean, there's certain group combinations for trio or duo that's going to be more successful just because of the toolkits they have. But yeah, I think it will still be very doable for most duo, trio, depending on classes. I don't think it's really going to be a huge difference. There'll just be some that have it easier than others. That's all. The chance of success against these targets increases or decreases based on a few factors. All right, let's see what this is. Level range. Soloing at a level 5 NPC when you're level 6 will be a very different experience than trying to solo it in a level 40 NPC when you're level 41. Expect NPCs to be a bit more challenging the higher level they are. Commensurate with your growing knowledge, skill, ability, arsenal, and gear. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I had a question. So my question about this was, when I first read it, if I'm level 1 coming out the gates, you obviously can't have a mob that's lower than you. So it's by default going to be an even con target. Or even a level 2 mob is going to be, I think that would be considered light yellow, I think is what I read. So I'm just curious how difficult it is going to be to get those initial levels if you're going to need more of a group. I mean, a group is obviously going to make it easier, but it will be interesting out the gate to see how that works. But they do say here that it will be easier because obviously you're not going to have the same experience as you have as level 40. You're not going to have gear. You're not going to have a whole arsenal of spells at your disposal or abilities if you're not a caster. So I think that makes sense. 2, player skill. As is already the case in Pantheon, any class in the hands of a skilled player will be capable of doing more incredible feats. That makes sense. There's no arguments on that. Class choice. While every class in Pantheon will have the potential to solo, some will be more effective and efficient at it than others. And I think that's already true today. Even certain classes just innately solo better, depending on like the ability arsenal. So like an enchanter, like I said, right now, I don't know if this will change. They can tank, they can CC, they can pull, they can DPS. Probably one of the most versatile classes in the game right now, if I had to say it bluntly. But if you're going to go at it with a tank, it's going to be a different experience. I mean, the tanks do enough DPS. Their soloing experience is obviously going to be slower than if you're playing a more bursty class. But I mean, I think that for the most part makes sense. I've even seen healers solo, so it's not like they can't. They have damage. It's just a slower experience. But they're a slow burn versus, say, a wizard soloing. They have bursty damage. They have tools at their disposal to root, snare, but they can't take hits. So while they kill faster, if they get resists, there's a higher potential for them to die versus if you're a healer who can heal yourself up. It's a slower kill, but at the same time, you can do it. We are planning on increasing the overall challenge of solo content in the game compared to the difficulty of the current solo NPCs, but also relaxing some diminishing return effects and giving classes more tools to engage with content in unique ways. I like that. The diminishing return effects, I had concerns about this as a wizard coming in from a solo perspective because I know they're going to be increasing the time to kill. So my concern is root. Typically after 3 applications, I start getting immunity messages. You can utilize the snare, but the snare doesn't last a super long time. So, I mean, there's ways to get around it if you time it properly, but it is a little bit more challenging. Whereas if you're an enchanter, you can CC or mez a target without diminishing returns. So it's nice to see that they are thinking about that. But we'll see how that comes out. NPC density, positioning, and movement patterns will be additional levers we use to make various sections of a dungeon or content area more challenging. Again, I feel like we already kind of have that in certain areas of the game. The example yesterday I used was the new Wild Bloods camp, where the outer part of Wild Bloods is not as dense, so you could do that probably with a smaller group. But once you get into the inner core of Wild Bloods, the density increases the further you get into the dungeon. So I feel like they were probably, when they put this dungeon in, they were kind of already planning that. So that does make sense. And even the movement patterns. So what movement patterns means is roaming NPCs versus static ones that kind of just stay in one spot. So the roaming mobs kind of add that additional difficulty where you're in a camp, but there's roaming mobs that could potentially engage you while you're killing another NPC. So just extra things like that kind of encourage you to have a well thought out group of having an enchanter or a puller, or making sure you have the adequate amount of healing, etc., etc. So it could go a bunch of different ways, really. This is where duo and small groups can thrive, and where we hope they will more likely to organically form. So that makes sense. What removing chevrons means for full groups. I think this is a big question for everybody that plays this game. For me, when I first saw that they were removing chevrons, I'm like, wait, isn't this supposed to be a group-centric game? So even my thought process based on games I've played in the past, I mean, in EverQuest, we never really had a system like that. Stuff was just hard. But at the same time, like, I play Pantheon because it is a group community centric type of game, but I also recognize the need for soloability as well. I think EQ's biggest challenge, and I only use that as an example because I feel like Pantheon kind of came from, I mean, even though the game is not like EQ whatsoever, I think it plays off that classic MMO feel. So you just expect that community group vibe when you come into a game like this. So when I first saw they were removing chevrons, I'm like, well, crap, is this still going to be the game for me that I want to play long term? So with this increased accessibility into previously full group only areas, how are we planning to achieve our goal of creating challenging content for full groups? Let's break this down so we can see the sums of the parts. Instead of throwing a blanket of group-only difficulty into a dungeon the moment you walk in, we will apply increased difficulty in specific areas and for specific encounters. Let's use Helnir Cave as an example. After those changes, solo players in small groups will have an easier time exploring and pushing deeper into Helnir Cave. It's entirely possible that an appropriate level and skilled necromancer, or a charm-wielding enchanter, or a well-geared and experienced rogue could make their way to and slay Hisser the Wretch or Terracera the Banebound on their own. It's more likely a duo or trio of players would be able to pull it off, and even more likely still for a full group. However, we fully intend for our major boss encounters and boss events where the best loot will be found to remain challenging enough to warrant a full group when attempted at the intended level. Staying with Helnir Cave as our example, this would include targets like Harathina, Ganeshura, and the Thief of Eternity. Ultimately, these targets and the layers they live in are examples of the content we will be instancing in the future. That is a big thing for me. I don't dislike open world content, but the barriers that it creates when it comes to going after a certain drop that you want or whatever, it creates barriers when you have people that are constantly farming that. We see that with certain high target encounters now. I'll use the White Werven, I think that's how you pronounce it, and Hangor, which drops the heart, which is very desirable drop for a wizard or a druid because it has the nature and cold buff. It's constantly camped. It's on a 2-hour spawn. You can log in pretty much at any time of the day, with maybe the exception of in the middle of the night. But even then, I'm sure there's people still camping it, depending on what time zone they're in. And chances are it's not up, or someone's sitting there waiting for it to spawn. So I think I'm happy to hear that they are still planning to move forward with some instance content, just because open world content can create barriers when you have a lot of people after the same items. So I'm happy that they're still planning to move forward with some instancing. With that said, though, I still would like to see some open world stuff, just because it adds different things to do and challenges depending on what it is. So yeah, I think there has to be a happy medium with that. I don't want it to turn into a WoW where everything is instance except for one world boss that you kill once a week, if that makes sense. We also have other mechanics we can lean into beyond NPC density pathing when we want to raise the difficulty bar for a specific area or encounter. Some of these include synergies between different NPCs when they are in combat together, NPC traits, environmental factors like climate and fractures. I like the synergy between different NPCs when they're in combat together. I think that is kind of unique. I don't know that I've saw too many games do that. Typically, NPCs would be independent of the abilities that they have. They don't really interact together. So I can see how they could do that. Like, say you have a pod of 3 mobs, they would probably pre-code them that if they are within X amount of range of each other during combat, they have this additional combat ability. So I think that's definitely pretty cool. I mean, you would still be able to split them with a monk if you didn't desire to kill them that way, if it made it too challenging or your group comp wasn't set up to handle maybe that extra combat ability. But I think that is a unique take. I don't think I've seen any games I've played really do that. I can't think of any off the top of my head. NPC traits, it would be interesting to see what they do with that. And environmental factors, like we kind of already have that with Hangor, where if you're away from a fire too long, you start taking ticking damage, or you're snared, things like that. So I think those are very unique takes on how to make specific areas and stuff harder. The role of the consideration system. When these changes go live, it will be important to /consider NPCs before you engage. Remember, they will no longer be a Chevron indicator. The determining factor of how difficult an NPC will be for you is how much higher or lower level the NPC is compared to yours. Generally, NPCs that con light yellow to dark orange, or 1 to 4 levels above you, are appropriate targets for full groups. NPCs that con dark blue to light yellow are appropriate targets for small groups, duos, and certain solo classes. NPCs that con light blue and green are appropriate targets for solo players. These parameters aren't intended to be forced or prescriptive, but are a helpful guide to get your bearings once these updates occur. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I do hope from a solo perspective, though, if you're fighting a light blue or green, that you'll still be kind of getting equivalent XP to what you would have gotten in the old system. I know they said they were increasing the XP you get based on the time to kill increase. I just hope that it will be kind of comparable, because like right now in my wizard, I mean, I'm 46 now, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, more soloing more frequently, usually I was soloing either dark blue to yellow mobs. Occasionally make maybe an orange, but those were a little bit more risky just because of if I get any string of bad resists, it could mean death. And it was a higher chance of that happening when I got into the orange category. But typically at yellow, which would be +1 to my level or lower, it was fairly, not, I won't say it was easy, but it was consistent for me to solo in a timely manner. I haven't soloed a whole lot since the new wizard changes went in, just because I'm higher level and I often have a group. But yeah, I just hope that that is taken into consideration. And I'm sure they're thinking of that. They don't want the solo experience to be monotonous, I don't think, like where you're killing greens for 2 hours and you're getting like a quarter of a bubble. Like that just doesn't seem very productive, and probably would do the opposite effect and discourage soloing. So I feel like based on what they have presented here, I don't think that will happen, but we'll have to wait and see once it goes live. Lastly, there are several updates coming to improve the rate of experience gain to coincide with these changes and the overall increase in time to kill. In practical terms, without seeing this in action, it may be difficult to know what to expect. As mentioned, we will be opening a public test round this spring to get everyone's feedback on these changes and make final adjustments before this update fully releases. Until then, however, here is what to keep in mind. The distinction between solo NPCs and group NPCs, the Chevron, will be going away. Okay, we know that. NPC time to kill will increase generally. NPC damage output will likely decrease and become less spiky overall, but a greater emphasis on sustainability and resource management during fights will be introduced. Because the difficulty of each fight is going to increase, we plan to increase the reward experience / loot of each fight to balance it out. I remember Joppa talking about that on stream, so that's kind of what I was saying for the solo aspect. If you're fighting a green / light blue, hopefully it will still be rewarding enough that people are encouraged to still solo versus looking for that sometimes elusive group. Every player should still feel like they can make progress solo, but some classes will be able to do so more efficiently than others. Certain classes may have an edge when it comes to the strength of their soloing by virtue of their abilities. Player skill will always play a role. I think one of the biggest things that I took out of this was the diminishing return changes that they're planning to do. I think that will make a big difference, particularly for, I play a wizard, as most of you know. If you don't, that's what I primarily mean. I think the biggest downside for wizard for these changes would be the diminishing returns, just because if mobs are taking longer to kill, that means I need to root the mob more. So diminishing returns could definitely come into play if it's taking double to triple the time it would normally take for me to solo. So I think that was one of the big things for me in this overall update. More content, including many named NPCs, will be available, and players may find it advantageous to team up with others organically if they are out hunting by themselves. Challenging areas will have denser populations of NPCs, with some NPCs synergizing with each other, forcing players to adopt creative tactics to win. NPC traits, climates, fractures, and more will play a role in the design of the most challenging areas. All good stuff. The bigger, baddest boss, NPCs, and toughest content will still require full groups to handle at their intended level. And in closing, in our post tomorrow, we'll talk about some of the changes in combat that will also be coming along with this update. As a reminder, all of this will be made available on the public test round for feedback before we push it onto the live servers. So that finishes up day 2 of the information that they have provided us. I don't think there's anything really bad. I think there's a few questions I have, particularly around XP gains for solo, et cetera, but it sounds like they've kind of got a wrap on that and they get it. So I don't think there's anything in this update to be super concerned about. I think there's a lot of positive things here. I think like I said, I think a few people were kind of feeling uneasy with the Chevron going away, and will it still be a group game? But it sounds like, I feel like these changes are positive. There's going to still be areas to group. There's still going to be areas to solo. Actually, probably more areas to solo, which I don't think is a bad thing. So I very much look forward to these changes. I'm excited to see them come out and play. And I also, one other thing I just wanted to pinpoint on, I really like that they made it clear that a level 5 mob will be different than a 40. And when they say that, they're not saying, well, obviously the 40 mob is going to be harder. What they're saying is at level 41, you have more stuff available to you to deal with a level 40 mob. So you're going to have more gear, you're going to have more knowledge of your class, you're going to have more spells, more stuff to combat what you're dealing with, versus when you're sub 10, chances are you don't have a lot of loot gear. Chances are you're not as familiar with your class. I mean, unless you've been playing up until this point, obviously you probably have some familiarity, but as a new player, looking at a new player coming into the game with no knowledge of the game whatsoever, it makes sense for those mobs to be easier than when you're obviously well into the game, you're familiar with your class, you have some gear at that point. So I think those are all awesome points that they touched on. So there's nothing I'm super concerned about. So if you have any comments or disagree or agree with anything I've said in this video, definitely leave a comment on the video and let me know what you're thinking. But I am excited about these changes. So I know yesterday in my video, I kind of said I still say that I think the leeway on the wipe was longer than I wanted, but I understand why they're wiping. I understand why they're giving us advance notice. Everybody has their opinion, right? So, but anyway, thanks everybody for watching this video. If you did find it helpful, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. I will hopefully be covering the rest of the days of these updates. So if you're interested in hearing my opinion, or if you want to tune into my Twitch stream, we can kind of chat about it there. But until next time, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Bye.